Hi guys, welcome back to another video today. We're back on the Kriss Vector, Krytac version. I've been doing a bit of work on this and trying to get some bits and pieces sorted with it. I've identified a couple of issues. One thing I've noticed so far, at the moment, it's cocked. And pulling that charging handle back, that travels back quite easily, no problem. When I pull the trigger, and I hold the trigger down, I go to pull it back, there's a lot of resistance before it then releases. And then again, it will ride back and forth, no problem. Now, I've come to the conclusion, I don't think, even though the hammer is being cocked here, and I realise that that is going to add some resistance, I don't think it's just that that's causing us the problem. Let me show you what my thought process is on what's going on here, and where I think some changes need to be made. Obviously, as the bolt comes back, it's cocking this hammer. Now that, I'll be honest with you, is not, with that much leverage on it, that's not that difficult, in my opinion. I don't think that's so much of a problem. It's going to add some to it, but not as much as I think we're getting here. So, what I think is happening here, the hammer obviously swings down through this groove and hits the striker, which is the thing that's actually going to strike the back of the magazine. And you can see that if we look through here, hopefully you'll be able to see down there, you see that little bit poking out down here. That is the striker poking out to hit the back of the magazine. Now, at the moment, that's forwards. We have a valve locker. So, as the system sort of cocks here, we're pressing, so on this one it actually has a valve locker, a bit like a pistol does. We've still got some of the resistance there when that's forwards. As we go to pull that back, it's still quite tough. And we'll be looking at the bolt in a moment as well. I think potentially this is your valve locker here, by the way. So if this striker is forward, the hammer comes forward, hits the striker, like so. And then as the bolt comes back, it pushes down on this, which then brings that back. Now that spring, to me, is really tough compared to this one. Like, extremely tough to press down. Now it's obviously riding on the underside of the bolt here, which is this bit here. And you can see it has sort of self-polished itself here. So I don't think any polishing needs to be done here. And actually on the thing itself. I think I'd like to experiment a little bit with a slightly weaker spring here, because I don't think it needs such a strong spring. The other thing we'll be looking at today are these things. So these are the rollers. Now, I took these out and I put them in the lathe and I just rounded the edges here so that they weren't biting into the frame. And that's actually made a bit of difference. If you only do one thing to this so far, I would say this is a good option, just around these edges. Hopefully I'll zoom you in a bit. You can see what I've done here. Just radius the edges slightly, because they're actually normally quite sharply cut. Also, hopefully you can just about see here, there's a bit of an indent. And that's where it's been running on these things. So I've come up with a new solution, or what I think could work. I've taken inspiration from a company called Angel Customs. Now, Angel Customs did some parts for the KWA Vector. They did a lightweight bolt carrier, and on the back here, I think on the front as well, it actually had roller bearings. Very much like what I have here. So my plan. Now again, this is just a plan. I don't know if it's going to work. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. However, I thought I'd show you the process because it is something I'd like to revisit at some point and try and make work. Essentially, the idea was to use a piece of steel bar and these bearings, which you can see I'm currently measuring up. the factory roller comes in at just a hair under 8mm, and the rollers that I ordered, or the bearings that I ordered, sorry, were 8mm exactly. And the idea was, and I'll show you this in a moment, to have the bearings on a steel pin, and then it would improve the rolling efficiency. Because what's basically happening is the rollers are obviously rolling inside the frame and rolling against the carrier itself. So this idea was to try and fix that. The idea is we're going to try and replicate this thing, but using this. Now, I don't think this is going to fit in here perfectly. It doesn't. So I'm going to have to turn the end down to make sure it fits in here, because I think this bit here is 3mm. 3.5mm. Well, I happen to know this is 4mm because I ordered it at 4mm, which is exactly what it is. So I'm going to have to take 0.5mm off of this to be able to fit into here. But the idea is we're going to stack 2 of these bearings on this, like so, which will give us the right width, notice. And what we'll do is we'll obviously knock this down to here, so it's got the same depth on that there. And the idea is I'm then going to cut this off. I'm going to use some Loctite or something just to locate these bearings. Now, as it's a bearing, this rolls incredibly smoothly. I can't quite describe to you how smooth that is. And also these surfaces are extremely hard. Whereas this, I believe this is stainless steel. I don't think it's steel. And it doesn't appear to be particularly hard either, in my opinion. It's fairly soft, which, at the end of the day, it's for an airsoft gun. It doesn't have to be really high grade or anything. But this, I think that will really help the operation of this. So we're going to measure this up, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to whack this in the lathe. I'm going to turn the end down so it can fit into here, and I'm going to cut this off, and I'm going to bond these 2 bearings onto here. But the idea is going to be is that is going to roll on that super smooth. It's not going to bite in as much as these do and wear out, hopefully. All right, guys, so I've done a little work on the lathe. I've made the little spindle, which is going to quickly try it out with the bearings. See how it all goes together. Starting to go on. There we go. Oh, there we go. Now I've purposefully left the burr on this end because I don't want the bearing to come off the end. But then equally, I don't want this to happen where they start drifting apart. So I probably am going to be bonding them on. And there you see we've got a slight nub out that side. There we go. Perfect. Right, so that's one down. Oh no, that one's gone straight on. Oh, that's a relief. Right. Oh, look at that. Perfect. There's a slight nub poking out the end of that, but I don't think it's going to cause me any problems. So I think we're just going to whack this back together with these roller bearings in and see how it works. Roller bearings on the back there. Oh, look at that. That's going to go in, I think. Let's just push that valve locker in. Okay, a little bit tight. Okay, now where it's tight, there's a little tiny step just in there. And that is basically where these things have been slightly wearing. Now I could just shave off the edges of the bearing, which would probably make that run a lot better. But I think we could probably just run it back and forth a little bit, and I think that would probably do the same job. I could just take a little bit off the bearings, off the edges potentially. Now what I could do to help the clearance along here is put a little spacer in here, which would just open that out a little bit, which actually is something that I've considered doing anyway, because we learned with the KWA that was necessary to make the system run better. again, I'm sort of taking what I know from the KWA to try and improve this system. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to space this back one out, and what I'm going to do is just use a shim for that. Now the shims I'm talking about are, you know, AEG spring shims. Not that I've ever owned an AEG, but they are pretty useful little things to have. These little brass ones I think will do the job. Right, hopefully they'll clear the... Let's just whack it in, see if we can get it to do what we want it to do. Okay, let's try that now. Right, there we go. And we're now running 2 shims. That's initially gone in there a lot better. Rolling a lot better in there at the moment. Still needs a little bit of effort, but let's just put this in. The aim will be to do a few hand cycles just to get it to bed in a bit. Morning guys, so I'm happy to admit when I'm wrong. I was having some issues with the Vector, and here is what's left of the bearing. It has completely disintegrated, leaving the shell and a couple of bearings behind. I think it's just too small a bearing to really work, which is a shame, because initially when I first had it together, it was actually starting to roll really nice. So yeah, a bit gutted by that actually. I felt that would be a really good alternative to what we currently have, but you know, that's the whole thing with this. You got to try these things. Unfortunately, it just didn't work out. So let's get this apart. I guess we're going back to the original system, which is a shame, but you know, we tried it. And one of the things I would like to address in this while I'm getting this apart is this valve locker. Now, what's happening with this valve locker is as the bolt is traveling, as it's going over this, it's obviously quite an aggressive to push it down. The spring is quite tough. I don't think it needs to be quite as tough as it is. I think we potentially could get away with something a bit lighter. We have got it's sort of pretty polished off underneath there, so I don't think that's really too much of a problem. So I'm going to remove this valve locker and try not to lose the spring in the process. I mean, that is a very heavy spring for what it is. In my opinion, it doesn't need to be quite that heavy. Nicely made part though. It's made of steel. But what I do want to do is have a look at this valve locker and the associated spring. Because again, as I said before, I don't believe that we need to have a spring quite that aggressive, because it's not a very strong spring to push this back. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a look at my springs and see if I've got something that's a bit lighter than this. It's not quite as strong. Okay, so trying to find the spring. So this is the original, and it's pretty tough. This is a Glock valve locker spring, which seems to be a bit shorter. Only by a little bit. Doesn't seem anywhere near as tough, which is good. I'll just pop the valve locker in there. See, it still feels really quite tough. Probably going to cut two rings off it. Okay, so that's in there now. It's not quite as heavy. Still reasonably. Let's try and go a little bit more. It doesn't need quite, I mean, that's loads better there. Yes, it gives a bit of tension, but nowhere near as much. Literally, look at that. That's all it needs. So I think I'm going to put it back together like that and see what we get. See if that's any better. Alright guys, so I've got this back together now. Fitting the original guides in there. And it currently racks and returns super smooth. It's worth bearing in mind, I do still have that extra 2 shims in the back here just to spread the rear receiver a little bit, just so that as it travels back it's not getting caught at all. It's travelling buttery smooth though, I must say. So I'm going to try it with the upper receiver. Okay, so trigger's been pulled, cock, let it go forwards, and that is nowhere near as difficult to cock now. That is pretty good. Let's try it. Okay, so double tap. That's actually running a hell of a lot better there. We would say, obviously, my bearing idea, as much as I'd like to think it was kind of ingenious, and you know, would potentially have worked. I mean, you can see if we zoom in here, looking at the thickness of the material here, it's just too thin. It was a good idea, but obviously it's never really going to be working for any long stint of time. But with that, so that is a Glock, so like a TM Glock valve knocker spring, and I've cut probably 3 loops off it on the valve locker, and that still works fine here. But the difference in racking it there is considerable. And I haven't lubed this at all. This is complete. I've cleaned it out and it's completely dry. And that runs really good now. I mean, you know, as I just showed you, semi-auto, double tap, actually runs really fast as well, even in auto. So I would go as far to say that valve locker spring really does hurt the efficiency, in my opinion, because there's so much tension on it. So hopefully that will be a good improvement. So do let me know in the comments what you think, guys. Again, if you guys want to do the same modification to yours, the TM Glock valve locker spring is what you need. Cut a few rings off it and you're all good. To be fair, the one I've got was an upgraded one, so you might get away with just the stock one, no problem at all. In which case, that'd be ideal. Obviously, any questions, fire away in the comments, and I will see you guys in our next video.